evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for a wonderful Town Book Center Presents event. That's right, 2 nights in a row. I'm excited for it. I'm here for it. Tonight, I am joined by Kathleen Glasgow, Liz Lawson, and Jennifer Lynn Barnes. So Kathleen is the New York Times bestselling author of Girl in Pieces, How to Make Friends with the Dark, and You'd Be Home by Now. She lives and writes in Tucson, Arizona. Liz Lawson is the author of The Lucky Ones, which was a Kirkus Review's Best Book of 2020 and is a newly minted New York Times bestseller forever. So congratulations, Liz. She lives outside of Washington, D.C. with her family and 2 bratty cats who might make an appearance tonight if the pre-show is anything to go by. And Jennifer Lynn Barnes is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of more than 20 acclaimed young adult novels, including the Inheritance Games trilogy, Little White Lies, Deadly Little Scandals, The Lovely and the Lost, and the Naturals series. The Naturals, Killer Instinct, All In, Bad Blood, and the e-novella 12. Jen is also a Fulbright scholar with advanced degrees in psychology, psychiatry, and cognitive science. She received her PhD from Yale University in 2012 and is currently a professor of psychology and professional writing at the University of Oklahoma. You can find her online at www.jenniferlynnbarnes.com or follow her on Twitter at JenLynnBarnes. Whew! All right, so normally the way that this works, if anyone is familiar, is that I ask questions and do interviews, but today I get to just sit back and watch creative people talk amongst themselves and ask way more insightful questions than I ever could. So with that all being said, I'm going to turn it over to them. If you have questions, you can ask them in our stream chat here. They will see them and they can answer them as well. So there you go. Guys, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here tonight to discuss this lovely book. I have an advanced copy here, collector's edition now, I'm sure. You can see those lovely ones up there. So I am so excited to get to talk to you, Liz, and you, Kathleen, about this. I was hoping you all could start off with just telling us a little bit about the origin story of the book. So where did the idea come from? How did you come together to write it?
Liz, do you want to start?
Sure. It was March 2020.
It was March 2020.
And we all know what that means. And Kathleen and I, as was everyone, we were stuck in our houses. We were, feeling a little depressed about everything. And we started talking because we have the same editor. We had gotten to know each other when I asked my editor to reach out to her to blurb my debut, which is a much sadder book, more on the line of what Kathleen's solo books are like. And so Kathleen and I got to be friends. And when lockdown happened, we both basically thought to ourselves and to each other, like, what would happen if we wrote something that wasn't super sad for a while? Because putting ourselves into that brain space at that time was just really challenging. And we started over Twitter DM, sort of just throwing back and forth ideas about like a murder mystery. We learned we were both intrigued by the disappearance of Agatha Christie that happened about 100 years ago. And from those Twitter DMs, the Agathas was born.
What part of?
Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say what was so it was earliest with Agatha Christie, but what came first? Was it the characters? Was it the disappearance part, or?
So it was first talking about what kind of book it would be. The main thing we knew is that we wanted it to be fun and kind of an adventure and not super deeply, darkly psychological. And we really started talking about, well, who would we put in this? We would have to have like 2 characters, and of course they should be polar opposites because that makes for interesting conversation and tension. And then we developed the characters of Alice and Iris is kind of a nerdy, bookish girl with some painful secrets. And Alice is a very rich, very popular girl. And, gosh, I just don't know how we decided who would be who, in this.
That was going to be my next question. Did you always know who was going to be who?
Pretty much. And then when we were talking about Agatha Christie's disappearance, the one thing that Liz and I really liked about that was, okay, well, Liz will say that everyone says that you don't really know what happened, but she disappeared for 11 days. They found her car on the side of the road. She checked into a hotel under her husband's mistress's name. And if that doesn't scream spite to you, I don't know what to tell you. But that origin story, I said, what teenage girl would not admire that? And so that fit in perfectly well with the way that Liz was envisioning the character of Alice. And that became the jumping off point for the story, which, as Liz told me, because she's a big mystery reader, you have to plot out beforehand because you have to know what we're going to talk about, because you have to have red herrings and plant clues everywhere. And usually I'm a pantser and I just write off the top of my head. So we had a spreadsheet. We did all of this before we actually started writing the story. Right.
Well, you're going directly into the next question that I put down, which is you're so into your mystery solving that you always know exactly what's coming next. Because I was going to say, how was the process for writing this book different from the process of writing your other books? And you've already told us one difference, Kathleen, which is that you had to plot instead of just sort of see where things go. Liz, are you normally a plotter, or was that new for you too?
It was new for me with this book, and now I have become much more of a plotter, much more. My first book I wrote The Lucky Ones from the seat of my pants until I got about 75% of the way in, and then I was like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, and then I had the typical throwing myself on the couch thing, and then it sort of plotted the rest, but not really, which is why it required a huge rewrite, I'm sure. But this was the first book I ever really sat down and precisely thought about in detail before actually writing a single page. And there's my cat. This is Joseph, everyone.
We left a little room for spontaneity as well if we needed to change something, or if I would do something like text Liz 3 days before a deadline and say, so I was listening to this radio story about this least favorite grandson of this grandmother who paid him to go to prison for the murder that her favorite grandson, her brother, actually committed. And so, but then he found out he was actually going to serve more time, so he turned on her. And I would do things and she would be like, oh, but we would incorporate things because she came up with the idea of the girls using tips and tricks from Agatha Christie books and the quotes at the beginning of Alice's chapters. And then I would sometimes insert little true crime tidbits in there, because that's more Iris's character is more into things in cold blood and real things, and they would mesh that way. So I would say that the book it's a plotter's heaven, and there's a little bit of pantsing inside as well.
That's very.
Did you know a lot about the character arcs going in? Because when you're plotting a mystery, you know the twists and turns of the mystery. But a lot of times when I'm writing, I might think I know the character arcs, but I don't always exactly know what's going to come out on page. So did you all plan that stuff out too? Did you kind of know how these two girls were going to develop?
That's a really interesting point. And no, I would say we did not specifically plan out their character arcs. We planned out their characters. We wrote up, pretty detailed bios of each of them, which was really helpful because each taking one POV, we had to understand the other person's character pretty deeply. But we did not, I didn't really have an idea where, it's not like I sat down and thought this is where Alice is starting and this is where Alice is going to end up. It was more just weaved into the story. And that's interesting because I always think of mystery writers as being real plotters, but I guess there's a big difference between plotting the plot and plotting the characters.
I think that we left room for their development throughout the book according to what we needed, because I think I remember asking you to some way, partway through the writing of the book, Liz, but where did Alice go? like what happened when she went, and you were like, I don't, just leave me alone, just keep writing. I don't want to talk about, I don't, and it would be like, okay. And then when we got to that moment in the book, it sort of came out.
Which makes for really authentic reactions, because in the book, Alice is like, doesn't want to talk about it. Iris is a little bit curious, and you can kind of see that maybe playing out.
And I think that because the book is, because it's dual POV and it's a mystery and the characters don't mesh in the beginning like that, not having their arcs in the beginning is correct, because they have to learn about each other as Liz and I are learning about them on the page, if that makes sense. Like their characters can't be set at the beginning because they're going to change by the end, because, you know, it's a friendship story as well. And like one of the mysteries is their friendship. So,
yeah, I love it in books where you get the arc that a lot of books would give to a romance, except it's given to a friendship. Mm-hmm. And you're seeing that play out on the page, because it's just this different kind of love story, where it's this love story between friends. You start out really different and you're thrown together. And I thought that's something that just goes beautifully here. And I think you can tell that y'all are friends in real life, seeing that kind of play out on the page. So I want to hop back to something Liz said. You mentioned the character biographies you kind of came up with for everyone. So, or for the two main characters at least. So I'm interested, what did those look like? What form do they take? How much did you know? How far back did you go in like their lifespan?
I mean, for Alice, the way doing the character bio is actually where we came up with one of the major plot points toward the end of the book. Because in my character bio, you know, I had that when she was younger, her parents got her this horse that she didn't really like. Mm-hmm. And we were like, oh, a horse. What if that horse came into play in the book? And so I would say we went back. I mean, it wasn't like 10 pages, but it was a couple pages each. And, you know, I think we tried to put in relevant details from each character's past that would give each other a sense of like who they would be these days, particularly like in relation to their parents, and like their families, because that, sorry, my cat does, I know, he just really likes to be on camera. He's just he just wants to be famous, Joseph. But it really, you know, it helped writing I lost my train of thought, but basically it helped us understand like each character's relationship with their families, which was like really important, clearly because they're in high school.
Right. That was another thing I thought the book just does so beautifully is, you know, my background's developmental psychology. So I'm always very interested in how like those formative early experiences make a character who they are. And this was one of those books where I could read it and be like, yes, all of this tracks. Like I can see how Iris became Iris. I could see how Alice became Alice. Very early on in the book, within those like first 40 pages, while we're getting to know the characters in the world before they're so deep in solving the mystery. So it's interesting to see that actually was something you all knew, right? You know, from the beginning. Did you each do those biographies sort of independently and then give them to each other, or did you make them together?
We did them independently so that each of us could go back and refer to them if we needed to.
Were they naturally distinct enough? Was there anything that showed up and you're like, oh, there's some overlap here, or did they just come out totally different from the start?
I think they came out totally different from the start because the characters are completely, mostly 95% different, although they both have like painful secrets.
How do the two respective characters compare to the other characters you've written? I know you all mentioned that this book you set out to write something very different. But do you see any similarities? And if not in character, like, is there any of your author DNA that you can kind of see across projects that worked its way into this one, even though you see it as very different?
I mean, yes, like in the Lucky Ones, my main female character, May, is like super, I mean, she's survived a school shooting. She's very, very angry and very, just like she's very angry is, I think, her primary emotion for the very beginning of that book. And I think when I wrote the first draft, particularly of Alice, she was a lot more edgy and a lot more angry. She was like dropping F-bombs left and right. And our editor was like, no. So yes, there's definitely similarities that I put in there, but I had to pull out, which Krista was right, as always. Absolutely right. But, you know, I think that, like, I like tend to write these characters that they have a little bit of edge to them, which, like, for this book was not the thing to do. Although Alice still has a little bit of prickliness to her.
Alice still has her edge in there. I love the moments where both of the girls are getting angry at the way that the police seem to view teenage girls as this monolith. Was that something you two had discussed as wanting to be like a theme in the book, or something that kind of runs through it, or did that just come out in the writing?
We had talked about that, how the police would dismiss what was happening with Brooke in the beginning because they would think she was just being overly emotional and she ran away and she was imitating Alice's earlier disappearance in the summer. And we did talk about that, and we talked a little bit about the way everyone, well, there's a lot of misogyny in the book, as there is in real life, towards women and girls, especially teen girls. Like, you can't do this, you're not intelligent enough, you're not smart enough, you're overly emotional. And that was something that we wanted to highlight in this book, where they decide to go rogue then and do it on their own and prove that, yes, they can do this, and not all girls are alike and not all cases are alike. And I think it's interesting, in one review of the book, they talked about how the book highlights what cases are amplified in the media in terms of missing girls and what other sorts of cases are not, and that the book also has a really good strain of, like, who gets justice and who doesn't, and who has to fight for it and who doesn't. And I was like, oh, I didn't really think about that. That's interesting. So, good job, Liz. So, you know. But it was a joy to write this book and dream it up with someone else, because, you know, it gets really lonely writing by yourself. And so this time it was a lot of fun, because, you know, we each wrote like our own chapter, and we would send it, and we had our rules, like, you write it one a day and then you send it, and we will progress forward this way. And it was a lot of fun, because then if we had a problem, we would just, you know, endlessly text each other, and you can't do that all the time when you're writing a book by yourself, because other people usually haven't read it. So they have no idea what you're talking about, and they would get really annoyed by you. So.
Did you know, you said you plotted out like some of the big twists and turns and red herrings. Did you know like whose chapter that was going to come in? Because I'm picturing knowing this thing is forthcoming, and then the other person gets there first, or something like that. So was that something you knew, or it was just you knew the big picture, and then however the other person paced it, you just like improvised with that?
We sort of knew, like we had
that spreadsheet.
We did, and we did say like whose chapter was what. Although sorry,
what would need to happen? Like, okay, we had a framework for each chapter.
Okay.
Yeah, and then
so you knew like this chapter, Iris is going to do this, and this one,
right? But sometimes it would work out where it was like, because of the pacing, it would be like, well, okay, Liz, this plot point, it has to happen in yours. Or she would say, okay, well, I got to cut this chapter short. It doesn't seem natural for this, so it's going to happen like in an Iris chapter, and you would have to. It was fun. You had to adapt.
I think that adaptation process sounds fun, because, you know, sometimes in the middle of the book, writing can start to feel like a slog when you're all alone. And it seems like maybe if there's someone else in it, and you're getting a few of these surprises now, like, and that maybe that like might change things up a bit.
And you could, you know, we could think of fun things like, well, you know, I would read something that Liz wrote from Alice's point of view, and then look at what I was supposed to do next for Iris, and then text Liz and be like, well, okay, looking at what you wrote, it looks like I'm going to have to do this. So sorry, I have to do this to Alice. Bye. Liz would be like, okay. So, you know, those things were a lot of fun. So even though it was plotted out, we had to leave a little room for spontaneity and the fun parts of the story and the little adventures they go on.
Right, so talk now a little bit about characters and plot. I'd love to get some insight into your process on the world of this book, because you've got the small town, you've got the school, you've got my personal favorite, the castle in this small town, which I absolutely loved. So, did you sit down and have those discussions about this place before you started to, or is that the kind of thing that popped up as you went?
Well, we always knew about the castle because didn't we, Liz? Because we were talking about, well, there should be like some classic mystery elements like the seaside town, rich and the poor, and then I think the castle, because the castle would be like this all-encompassing thing that you could return to again and again if there were other books, because it could be used for lots and lots of things since it had been there for like years and years. So,
but I don't think the castle was in at least the first draft of the first act. Like, we went back and put that in.
Yeah.
I think while we were writing the first draft, but it was not in like our initial like brainstorming, but it was such a good idea.
Yeah, because we needed something like that would would be useful. So
it's just such a striking visual, and then you throw out that there was this historical murder at the castle.
Yeah,
which I am very curious about, but all of the other little elements of this town that feel very much like this real coastal town, and very evocative of what you've said. Some of your influences are just both from the Agatha Christie, also the Veronica Mars vibes and feels in there. It all comes across kind of so clear. And then the little elements like how Iris and her friends refer to the different cliques, and Alice is completely unaware, like the kids using only last names.
Right.
I totally didn't realize until I got to Iris's chapter, because I was like, oh, they just all happen to have last names as first names. Alice. There's just all these neat little details. So I was very curious as I was reading, like, did most of those just kind of pop up as you went, or anything discussed? Or
I think so. I think quite a few of those just popped up when we were each writing individual chapters, and we would just think about them. Like, I don't think we talked about Dottie's Donuts. It just happened, like, well, they're stopping for these donuts, and then we call it like Dottie's Donuts. Or we would text each other like, well, where does everybody have fun? And it'd be like, well, probably the kids who don't have a lot of money go to the kind of rundown skating rink. Well, let's call it Seaside Skate, and then Cole Fielding will work there. And so it was a fun, on the seat of your pants process like that. I think building the town and thinking about it. And Liz, she lived in California, so she had a lot of experience with the coast and the way things should look and smell. And she's good at weather, so I would always text her like, "Is it
good at weather?" Right now?
Yes, good at weather.
I have Google, Kathleen. That's how I'm good at weather.
Liz was my Google. I was like, well, how tall would these cliffs be?
And I'd be like, well, let's Google it.
Have you read back through your texts and messages since finishing the book?
Yes.
Have you done the scrolling back through to Steve?
Yes.
On Twitter particularly, yes.
Yes. Yes.
That's fun because you just have this documentation. It's like,
yeah.
Not the oral history, but the text history of how the Agatha's was written.
Yeah,
and
it's cool.
Like in a writerly sense, I'm really proud because I have the text where we were talking about what to call it, and I was like, we should call it the Agathas.
You did.
I did.
All you.
And then because we wrote it in secret and we didn't tell our agents or our editor what we were doing, it was just fun for us. And so I think that's why the experience was partly so pleasant, is that there wasn't a contractor expectation over our heads. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, oh, well, now that they say they actually like it and they want it, which was a complete surprise. I thought we'd all get fired. They kept the title of the Agathas, and they have never kept any of my titles for my books. And that changes. So I was like, yes, finally, they kept the original title. So I was very happy about that.
Kathleen, tell the story of how you emailed your agent to tell her about the Agathas. What was the subject line of the email?
So we didn't tell anyone we were writing it. It was very pleasant and fun, just noodling around with no burden of any kind. And then at a certain point, Liz said, Kathleen, I think this is like really good. This should be something. We should show it to our agents and our editor. And I was like, no one's going to get a mystery from us. I write sad books, and I'm very happy to write sad books because I love living on Planet Sad. Like, that's my happy spot is Planet Sad. Strange enough. Yeah. And I'm happy. I'm like, they're not going to take that. Pshaw, Liz. Shove off. We've done our business for now. And then Liz said, actually, I told my agent a long time ago, and she really loves it, and she thinks that we should show it to Krista. And I was like, oh my God. So Liz basically pulled an Alice Ogilvy on me by stringing me along for weeks to finish a sizable portion of this book. And then I didn't know what to do because it is a mystery, and I write contemporary realistic fiction. And I didn't know what to tell my agent, so I sent her this long email, and in the subject line, I didn't know what to say, so I just wrote, I'm sorry. Originally she called me up after you and she's like, I thought you were leaving me.
I'm sorry. Like, I'm so sorry, agent. I wrote a book. I did what you want me to do.
I wrote this book that's gonna be a New York Times bestseller.
I didn't know what to say because it was, because I think the thing, some agents, they like certain material from you and other material is not their cup of tea. And they're like, well, I don't know that, some of them do. So you always have a fear. And then you don't know what your editor is going to say if two writers of mostly sad books show up and they're like, hey, we wrote this really fun mystery with a little thread of darkness, but mostly it's just fun and there's shenanigans and like, they don't know what they're doing. And how do you like it? And some editors would be like, get that off my desk right now. How dare, and you don't know what's going to happen. But we were very lucky that everyone was super supportive and really loved it. So,
and
obviously, we had
Krista said yes, and everyone could see the vision for this book. Can you talk a little bit, craft-wise, about the revision process and sort of how that worked? So, like, what kinds of things changed in the second draft for this book?
Our entire second act changed. Mm-hmm. Pretty much, we tore out the entire heart of the book and redid it. As our editor says, we basically had a crash course in mystery writing. Mm-hmm. As we were writing this book, we learned how to write a mystery. Mm-hmm. So, there were things that I can't even remember what the original. Do you remember what the original Act 2 had in it?
It was a lot of stuff about. There was a lot of stuff about Steve and believability.
Oh, that's right.
And it was mostly a lot of things about Steve, and then it was gently massaging Alice's prickly nature into shape so that I think that she would match a more classic mystery heroine.
Yes.
Believable, nosy, busybody, sometimes prickly, but never mean. And then ripening Iris's character a little bit more background and less. I think I had to take out some of the darkness. And then amping up the town and the other characters. Like, she wanted more Lillian.
I was going to say, I had a question for you all for later, which was favorite supporting character in the book. And I was like, mine was Lillian.
We love Lillian.
That is also our editors. Lillian's amazing.
Which is not surprising. She was also my first editor. We have back in the day. But I was going to ask that, and then I was like, by the way, I love all the Lillian scenes, so I'm glad to have gotten a few more of those.
Yes.
We loved, I think it was important to us too that they have some, not stringently mentor-like characters, but some strong female role models in this book. Even though Ricky Randall is ethically flexible, she is a strong role model for Iris and believes in everything that she's doing and helps them along. And as Lillian Levy does, and even to a certain extent, Tessa, the news reporter, who believes them and is like, well, okay, what else can you give to me? She's striving to be a success as well. And so, I think it was just a joy for us to write all those. And I think that our editor, Krista, really liked those touches in the book. And everyone seems to like Spike.
Spike. So who are if you had to pick one of the supporting characters as your favorite to either write or read, depending on which part of the process you're doing, who is it?
Kathleen.
Oh, some of my favorite supporting characters to write, it was Lillian. She was a joy writing. I liked writing Spike. I loved writing Ricky Randall and just wondering what else she could get up to and how she could annoy Alice. But I will always have a soft spot in my heart for Cole Fielding because, as Liz will tell you, she did not want him in this book, and I wanted him in this book. I desperately needed Cole Fielding, and I wedged him in and made him a plot point at the last minute.
You did. It was very impressive.
Yeah.
She's like, now he's a part of the plot. You cannot remove the Cole Fielding.
I did.
He's in there forever.
It's exactly what I did.
Everyone's always trying to get you to get rid of Cole, Kathleen.
That is funny though, because I was like, I wonder if they'll ever do another book, and I wonder if we'll see more of Cole.
Well, if Kathleen has her way, he'll have his own spin-off series.
He has a heart of gold. There's a lot to explore with Cole. But Liz, who are your favorite side characters to write, Liz?
I like writing Lillian. She was really fun. I also really like Raph, who was not on the page as much as he was in original drafts in this version of the book. And I really like writing Kennedy because she's just so rude. And sometimes it's fun to just write a very rude character.
Dottie was fun to write too. From Dottie's Donuts. Like, she was fun to write.
Yes.
Very
good. Well, we're at about 30 minutes in, so I'm going to start plucking some audience questions. Audience, if you have any more questions that you have not asked yet, this is a great time to start throwing those in there. So here's one that says, how much did you find yourselves empathizing with your character over the other character?
I think that's an interesting question. I don't know that I empathize with Iris more over Alice because they were connected. It hurt when they had to have a fight and that we had to write that on the page. So that was a little difficult when we were trying to figure out how to write their fight, like what they would say to each other. Because then that hurt a little bit because I'm Iris and she's Alice, and Alice had to say really super mean things to Iris.
And it kind of felt like we were fighting.
I know.
We had our characters fighting.
And it was very sad. So
yeah.
When you're writing the fight has to take place. Did it I can't remember. Did it span multiple chapters? We get both points of view.
It's like 2.5.
Yeah.
It's like 3 or 4 chapters, I think.
I mean, the fight itself the fight itself we do get pretty much from both of their POVs, like back to back. So
yeah.
Because it's just occurring to me that when you're writing an Alice chapter, if Iris is in it, that means you're writing Iris's dialogue, even though Kathleen is Iris.
Yes.
Which must be weird when you get that chapter back, because then you have to look back to see what your character just said in that moment.
We had, if you're going to co-write, you have to have a lot of flexibility. One, because you're sharing the story. It's not one person's story. You're dreaming it up together and you're sharing it. So you have to be flexible and things can't be precious. But especially if it's dual POV, like Liz can go into an Irish chapter and change Alice's dialogue, not the context, but the way she says it. So Liz can go in and say, I don't think that Alice would phrase it this way. And she can go ahead and like change that the way that she thinks that Alice would say it. And so you have to be able to let that happen. And, you have to do things like, I would always be like, Liz, why are Iris's cheeks always pink in Alice's chapters? Like, is she sick? What's going on? She's not, she's not like a wilting flower here. What's going on? Or why is she breathing hard?
That was one today. Why is she breathing hard? I was like, she's running to catch up.
Like, she's literally 2 feet away. I'm like, I don't know. So you can change little things like that. Or, you can say, she wouldn't wear that, or I don't think that would be her reaction. And that's fine, because you know your character and you go in and you change it. And so you have to be extremely flexible. It's not easy to co-write. I think you have to choose someone whose prose style kind of mirrors your own, and you have to have boundaries and agree on things beforehand. And you have to be flexible in the sense that, we have children and lives, and so you have to say, I can't work on my chapter today because, well, the dog and my children are throwing up. So, you need someone who's going to understand that.
Yeah. We have a lot of questions coming in about the co-writing process. So what were some of the unexpected surprises of working with another author?
Liz, I'll let you start with that one.
I guess looking back, I think we both went into it like very naively. And so there were a lot of unexpected surprises, like all good though, luckily. Like, I mean, Kathleen's laughing. No, but I mean, I didn't think about all the potential things that could go wrong when we started doing this, which I think is like kind of how you have to venture into a co-writing thing probably, or else you wouldn't do it. And so, like one of the unexpected pleasures was that I didn't really fully think about was getting the opportunity to not only like write something new, but also read a new thing every time before I wrote that new thing. So it was like a little treat before the work every single time.
Yeah. And I think that you're like pushing each other. Like if you're writing by yourself, you can have those days where you're like, oh, I don't feel like writing today, and you'll make up an excuse not to write. But then when you have someone who has sent you a chapter, it is your turn. The book cannot move forward without you. And then you read like the great thing that they've written. You're like, well, I gotta try to top that. And it's good because you're pushing each other in a good, like positive way.
So I'm curious now what you two did on your off day. So while the other person had the book, were you working on a different book? Were you thinking about your next chapter? Were you actually getting the mythical time where you weren't doing any of those things?
Well, for when we were first writing the Agathas, we would Liz would send me a chapter like in the morning, and then I would try to write the next chapter that night. And that was not technically like ideal. But and Liz was writing another book at the same time.
Yes.
She can talk about that.
I would like to never think about that ever again.
I was going to say, how do you even keep it all?
It did not, let's just say that book is being rewritten right now. It did not go well. Krista was like, no. So
I can't write 2 books at the same time. I don't know how people do it, how you switch back and forth from different subject matters or even like emotion, like tonally from book to book.
Tonally is the hard
thing. I can't do it.
Yeah.
And I like to watch TV too much, so I can't be a person. I can't be a person who like writes like all day. I'm like, I need to go watch Better Call Saul now. So I'm not ashamed of myself.
You shouldn't be. You have taught me how to take breaks, which is like a really important thing to learn in life. I have never been good at it.
Right. And I think
it's really hard when you're a writer because you don't have those, unless you make them set hours. You don't have your set hours. And
yes, I can go into everything.
I think the longer you write, the more you set your own personal boundaries, and you say things like, I'm setting hours for myself. Or I'm not going to do this, as I have before. And you learn as you go along what works for you.
Let's see, another question from the audience. Did you two ever run into a spot where you really disagreed about the direction of a character arc?
Go ahead, Liz. Say it. Say what you did.
Say what I did. I didn't do anything.
We had a little tiff about something, which I can't remember what it was now. And later, Liz told me that I was actually right. But before that, I opened up her Alice chapter next morning after I thought we worked everything out. And Alice had thrown a cell phone at Iris's head. And I thought, Liz is not over this at all. So I think you work it out within the book using your characters as your pawns.
In terms of like the direction of a character, though, I don't think we have had any sort of major disagreement in terms of like a character's development. Maybe
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I mean, I would say the biggest change of character in while we were drafting was like you said, like Steve's character got tweaked quite a bit.
Yeah, his storyline was tweaked.
But I think we were kind of on the same page with that.
Yeah.
Everything except for Cole.
Yes. Cole's character arc should have never have happened. No, I'm just kidding. He's lovely.
She's still mad about Cole, but you cannot have a high school mystery without the cool blonde guy with secrets on a motorcycle and a leather jacket who works at the skating rink. Yeah. It's
like he has brown hair. He looks like Cole Sprouse, who he is named after.
No, he has blonde.
That's the one thing. I got to name him, and I named him after Cole Sprouse, a.k.a. Jughead from Riverdale.
He's blonde. He is blonde. Like a honey blonde. And it falls like gently over one eye.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I have a whole thing in my head.
Okay. I like it.
Okay, here's the next question. If you can answer it, will there be a sequel to the book?
Yes.
Yes. And there should be an announcement in the next week, less than week. So, yes.
So many questions that I want to ask. I'm sure.
And it might have something to do with it might have something to do with that old film star.
That's what I was hoping for the sequel. I've been waiting for someone to write a historical, like Natalie Wood-esque, old school Hollywood starlet.
It's called The Night in Question.
Ooh, excellent.
And there's a lot of castle in it. Mm-hmm.
Yes. There's a lot going on.
That was going to be my next question. You know exactly what I'm asking. Like, is it Hollywood starlet? Are we going to get to see lots of castle?
Oh, yes.
You will know very soon. Very soon.
Wonderful. Let's see. We've got another one. With this one making such a splash, do either of you think more authors will work together on projects like this? And I will add on to that, if you cannot predict whether more authors will, what piece of advice would you give any authors who are kind of inspired by this beautiful collaboration to try something similar?
I think it's interesting because after the book was announced, like I got a lot of DMs from people who were like, oh, Krista, our editor, must have like set you guys up together. And I was like, no, we just started writing it and we didn't tell anyone. And everyone thinks that we were paired together under contract, and it's like the exact opposite. And I think the only advice I could give people is choose someone that you genuinely like as a person and as a writer. Draw up how you want to write this book, work out the plot together before you start writing it, and work out whatever boundaries that you need, and have fun with what you're writing. And remember that you have to be flexible with each other in terms of sharing that story.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, you have to like decide that you actually want to co-write. Like co-writing in theory sounds great because it is in so many ways, but it sounds great because you only have to write half a book, right? Mm-hmm. That's everyone's dream. But in practice, like you have to, like Kathleen said, you have to commit to being very flexible. You have to commit to another person in ways that like you don't even think about when you're starting. So like you have to go into it thinking like, okay, like this is something I really, really want to do. And I'm like committed no matter what, like I will not be precious with my words, and I will be like flexible to the point of like being humble, I guess.
Yeah, sometimes you have to say, okay, let's try it this way, right? Even if you don't agree, like, let's try it. And you have to be willing to give a lot and over to the story. Like I said, it's not your story, you're sharing the story with someone else. And in any case, if you have a disagreement, your editor will solve it. Their opinion goes, and then you're like, well, all right, I lost that one. So, but you have to share it. I don't think that just anyone can say, oh, I'm gonna want to co-write a book with me, because it's good to write with someone else, but then also you are writing with someone else. It's not just you anymore. You have to be ready to like open yourself up in that way.
And to talk to the person like every day.
Control. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, on the one hand, yes, you wake up and more of the book is written.
It's magic.
Is indeed the dream. Right. But this other side of it too, so it seems like obviously you two think very highly of each other's writing. You trust each other kind of creatively, and you have voices that really work together, and all of these things make this a really good match.
And I think that if you're going to co-write with someone, you have to agree on like how you're going to co-write that story. Like we agreed on how we were going to write the story, and we agreed on that process because of what the story dictated. We agreed it was going to be a fast-paced dual POV story, and that we were going to write it quickly, trading chapters like every day. If you're writing with someone else, you have to agree right away on how are we going to write this book, depending on what type of book and what tone it has. Is it a long, drawn-out, contemporary, realistic book? Is it dual? Do you know what I mean? So if you're a quick writer by nature and you have picked someone who is not, you are going to have issues. Do you know what I mean? You're going to have issues. You have to adapt your writing process and style to their writing process and style for that book that you're writing together. Because you can't sit around and wait 6 days for them to like send you a sentence. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And especially if you're scheduling your own life around when you're expecting to have it and do it, being able to hit all those mini deadlines before your big deadline seems like it's pretty huge.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have time for one last question, which is from the audience. What are the books you're reading now, and who are some of your favorite YA authors? I'm going to give everyone a second, because every time I get asked this question, my brain immediately goes blank, and I'm like, I have never, ever read a book before in my life, and I cannot remember. Let's talk for a moment to give everyone a chance to remember either what they're reading or a favorite author or something. So does anyone want to start?
I remember.
Okay, perfect.
So the last two books that I have read most recently that I loved were Message Not Found by Dante. Is it Medema or Medema?
It's Medema.
Medema, which was really beautiful. And She Gets the Girl by Rachel Lippincott and Allison Derrick.
Ooh, I need to read that.
It's so, like, I loved it. Like, I hardly ever read love stories, and I loved this, and it was a love story, and I cried. Those are my two most recent reads.
Nice.
My most recent read was Book Lovers by Emily Henry, which was just like such a joy to read. I finished it last night. And now I've been reading a lot of like murder mysteries and adult thrillers. And the one that I'm reading, I'm trying to remember the name of it. I just started a new one that is about, it has like all the Jane Austen characters. Oh, the Murder of Mr. Wickham. And it has like all the Jane Austen characters coming together in like an old country English manor. And then one of them dies. And it's kind of like Clue meets Jane Austen. I just started it, but it sounds, so far it's great, and I love the premise.
Excellent. Well, I think that is our last question. So thank you very much to everyone. Thank you, Liz and Kathleen. This has been amazing. And
Thank you.
again, reminder to everyone, you want to read this book if you haven't already.
Thank you so much, Jen. Oh, wait, I want to know what you are reading right now.
But I am reading.
Mhm.
I just finished Daisy Jones and the Six.
Oh, I love that book.
Which I'm kind of obsessed with the format
Yes.
of, because the whole thing's written as an oral history. So it's this book where you're getting bits and pieces of all of that. So I have a long list of things I want to do someday as a writer. And now on that list, I have write something in oral history form, because
that book
it's
is so
so
good.
fun to read.
You have another book coming out soon, don't you, Jen?
Yes, so the final Gambit will be out on August 30th, and
Can't wait.
it's the third book in the Inheritance Games trilogy. So
I'm so excited. Yay!
That is very exciting.
very good.
Oh,
Thank you so much for having us and chatting with us, and for everyone who came. You can say hi.
Yes, thank you.
Saskia's going to say hi.
Oh,
She's waited patiently this whole time.
Aw. Well, thanks to the three of you for being here with me tonight. I got to actually just be part of the audience and do the tech stuff behind the scenes, but being part of the audience is always fun for me. And oh, look, a dog. And thank you to everyone who came out to watch us tonight, and thank you for all the questions. So this is the part of the show where I do have to shamelessly plug a bookstore, but it's a bookstore, so like it's not that shameless. We're wonderful. So if you think to yourself, gee, this sounds delightful, I want to read the Agathas, where can I get a copy of this book? How do I acquire such things? Where are books from? You can get this book and many others at Town Book Center. We are located in Collegeville, Pennsylvania, right across the street from the largest Wegmans in the country. If you're not local to Pennsylvania, or you're not comfortable shopping out in public yet, or you're just like, putting pants on to go get things is awful, bring the book to my house, we can do all those things for you. You can shop with us online on our own website at townbc.com. That's TOWN as in Nike, E as in Echo, B as in Bravo, C as in Charlie.com. We do curbside. We will mail things to you. Thank you all again for being here tonight. And thank you all for just making this such a wonderful, delightful show for me to, I'd say work, but the reality is it felt very little like work tonight.
Thank you, Drew.
All right.
yes, thank you so much.
Have a wonderful night, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.